introduce you all to the 4th Satadru Memorial Lecture. Professor Satadru was born in Kolkata on January 24, 1969. He moved to California as a teenager and attended the University of California, Berkeley, where he earned his bachelor's and master's degrees, and the University of Washington, where he earned his PhD. Professor Shane taught at the City University of New York for 12 years prior to which he taught at Washington University in St. Louis and Purdue University. At Queen's College, he taught courses in ancient and modern India, Pakistan and Bangladesh. He created several upper-level MA courses such as Sex, Society and Indian Cinema, Gandhi and Nonviolence, South Asian Nationalism, and Hindu and Muslims in South Asia. During 2012 to 2013, he brought the Year of India to Queen's College through a year-long film festival screening on Indian films every month. Professor Shane's scholarship was his passion, through which he sought to expose the iniquities and hypocrisies wrought by the colonial regimes in South Asia and in the Indian Ocean world. His passion and faith for writing was clearly visible in his blog essays, marvelous long-form ventures of analysis and observation. He is the author of several books on South Asian history. His 5 single-authored monographs include Discipline and Punishment, Colonialism and Convict Society in the Andaman Islands, Migrant Races, Empire, Identity, and K.S. Ranjit Singhji, Colonial Childhoods, Juvenile Property of India, 1860 to 1945, Savagery and Colonialism in Indian Ocean, Power, Pleasure, and the Andaman Islanders, and Restoring the Nation to the World, Binoy Kumar Sarkar, and Modern India. In addition to these, there are 2 more collections of essays and 1 co-edited volume. Professor Satadru Shane had travelled to Presidency University on 12 April 2017 to deliver a lecture titled Indian Perspectives on Fascism and Militarism at the Department of History. An avid traveller who enjoyed riding his motorcycle and an academician par excellence, Professor Shane's sudden demise on 8th of October 2018 was a great loss for the whole academic world. We are honoured to host this lecture in his memory for the 4th time this year with Professor Shane's best wishes, blessings and generosity. Professor Shane, his mother, who unfortunately couldn't make it here today, is a retired professor and a former head of the Department of Philosophy at Omani University. After moving to the United States, she taught as an adjunct faculty at the California Institute of Integral Studies. She has also worked as a resource specialist for Modesto City Schools in California and currently works as a reader and educational testing service in Princeton, New Jersey. She currently spends most of her year between California and India. On behalf of the Department of History, Presidency University, we would now request Dr. Satadru to deliver a message on Professor Shane's behalf. Sir.
Good afternoon to all of you. On behalf of the Department of History, Presidency University, Kolkata, I welcome you all and I extend a hearty welcome to my mentor, teacher, Professor Seema Alavi, who generously agreed to deliver the 4th Satadru Memorial Lecture. The department is also thankful to Professor Zain and her family for the generous endowment for this annual memorial lecture series in the memory of late Professor Satadru. Generally, Professor Zain used to be present in these lectures in person, but this time she could not make it because she sent her passport for renewal, but she unfortunately could not receive it back in time, and that is why she had to cancel her flight tickets as well. However, Professor Sen has expressed her gratitude to the department and best wishes for the success of the event. And today, on behalf of Professor Sen, we have some members of the Sen family, especially Ms. Piali Sharma, who is late Professor Satadru Sen's cousin sister, and Dr. Koili Chakraborty, who is the aunt of Professor Satadru. So they are representing the family here, and the department is also expressing a hearty welcome to all of them. Now over to Dr. Nauras Afriki to introduce the speakers of today's Satadru lecture. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I am privileged to have been assigned the task to introduce our speaker for today. She needs no introduction. She is one of the foremost scholars from South Asia. Yet, I'll still read out her abridged biographical profile just as an expression of our gratitude to her for accepting our invitation and as a mark of our appreciation for her scholarship. Professor Seema Alavi is a professor of history at Ashoka University, India. She specializes in early modern and modern South Asia with an interest in the transformation of the region's legacy from Indo-Persian to one heavily affected by British colonial rule. She has written books on the military, medical, and religious histories of India. Her most recent books are the Albert Urani Award winner, Muslim Cosmopolitanism in the Age of Empire, which was published by Harvard University Press, USA, and Sovereigns of the Sea, Omani Ambition in the Age of Empire, brought out by Penguin India this year. Professor Alavi earned her PhD from Cambridge University, England. She has taught at the Jawaharlal Nehru University, the Jamia Millia Islamia, and Delhi University. She has twice been a Fulbright Scholar and a Smuts Visiting Fellow at Cambridge, and was a visiting scholar at the Harvard Yenching Institute in Harvard. In 2010, she was at the Radcliffe Institute at Harvard as the William Bentinck Smith Fellow. She wrote Sepoys and the Company, Tradition and Transition in Northern India, 1770 to 1830, which was brought out by Oxford University Press in 1995, and has co-authored with Professor Muzaffar Alam a book titled A European Experience of the Mughal Orient, the Ijaz and Arsalani, Persian Letters, 1773 to 1779, of Antoine Louis Henry Bollier, brought out by Oxford University Press in 2001. Her book, 18th Century in Indian History, in the Oxford Debates series, is a popular reader in India and abroad. In 2009, she wrote Islam and Healing, Loss and Recovery of an Indo-Muslim Medical Tradition, 1600 to 1900, published by Palgrave Macmillan, UK, in 2009. She serves on the editorial boards of several national and international journals, including Modern Asian Studies, a Journal of Colonialism and Colonial History, and Journal of the Royal Asiatic Society, UK, as well as Biblio, published from New Delhi. We are very honored to have Professor Alavi with us today, and now may I request Professor Alavi to come up on the dais.
Pleasure to come to Presidency University with so many students who are now teaching here and so many old friends. So thank you. I would like to thank the university and the history department for inviting me to give this Satadru Sen Memorial Lecture. I would like to thank Satadru's family for this generosity with which they host these lectures, not just here, but I gather in other parts of the world as well. I particularly agreed without any hesitation to do this lecture because apart from being a scholar, colleague, Satadru was also a dear friend of mine, much younger than me, but we shared our common interest in the Indian Ocean. And I think the last time I met him was in 2017 at a conference in Sheffield University in the United Kingdom, where we had met after a very long time, and we decided to slip away from the formal dinner of the conference and settled with our own conversations for many hours. And as usual, the conversations were about the enigmas of the Indian Ocean, which excited both him and me, the limitations of empire and nation states as frames to understand these enigmas of the ocean, the kind of political enterprise and political projects that were possible in the ocean, which were not necessarily European empire framed or nation state framed. And I remember that evening very vividly. Little did I know that this would be my last lovely, long academic and social interaction with a very dear friend. I think it is only befitting that I speak to you today about some of my new work on the enigmas of the Indian Ocean, on the political projects, the political ad hocism of the ocean that enabled certain kinds of politics which was non-European and Asian to kind of nurture in a lecture that is dedicated to his memory. So I think the timing of this invitation, my own interest in the political enigmas and political ad hocism of the ocean, and Satadru and my shared interest in these enigmas was just perfect. So thank you very much for having me here. Let me now begin sharing some of my thoughts with you, and I would again say shared thoughts that both Satadru and I shared in this talk. So, the Nobel laureate Abdul Razak Gurna, in his prize-winning novel Paradise, which many of you may have read, introduces us to the 12-year-old African boy Yusuf, who is sold on the east coast of Africa by his father to his merchant friend Aziz in order to repay a debt. This is the way the novel begins. Yusuf, this 12-year-old slave boy, travels widely with his uncle slaver Aziz on the Swahili coast, stopping at the small towns and villages as Uncle Aziz transacts his business. And you can follow the map here. At a longish halt at the town of Tayari, close to Zanzibar, Aziz explains the ethnic landscape to this bewildered little boy, Yusuf. He says, in the days when I first came to this town, it was run by the Arabs of the Sultan of Zanzibar. They were Omanis, he explains to Yusuf. If not Omanis, then servants of the Omanis. Gifted people, he says, the Omanis, very able. They came to build their little kingdoms here for themselves. Their noble prince had come all the way from Muscat to make himself master of Zanzibar, so why not them? Unquote. Yusuf continues to notice and question the visible Arab presence throughout his sojourn with Uncle Aziz in East Africa. The Omanis Yusuf notices in Africa were not just slavers and traders like his Uncle Aziz. They were also political entities. Crossing the ocean for them was a political project as much as it was a commercial one. So in this talk, I pick on Oman as a case in point of a viable political project that was shaping on the ocean in conversation with Western imperial politics in the age of empire. In the age of empire, Oman's geographic and ethnic embrace was exceptional, and you can see that embrace in all the orange portions of this map. It stretched from its Arab home turf and port of Muscat across the Indian Ocean to Zanzibar in the east coast of Africa. It had a foothold in Bandar Abbas on the Persian Gulf and Bombay in India was very much part of its political imaginary. This geographic and ethnic embrace, which I call Afro-Arab, Perso-Arab, revealed its ingenious political practice as it jostled with European imperial powers scrambling for the spoils of the ocean, and scripted along with them the political culture of the ocean. Viewing the Indian Ocean, therefore, as a political space alongside, of course, being the wide canvas of global commerce, I started to follow the story of the Al-Busaidi family of Oman that became the kingdom's prominent royal house, giving to it a string of sultans who are so visible in the archive and yet so surprisingly missing in the pages of history. I was convinced that weaving the story of the Al-Busaidi family into the broader tapestry of world history would add to the rich histories of the Indian Ocean, offered by, among others, Fahad Bishara, Thomas Mentor, and more recently, Mehmood Kurian, that focus on the mobility of Indian merchants, bankers, and Arab jurists, and the making of legal regimes in the waters, but which also frame protagonists in the narrative of European imperialism and capitalism alone. The Al-Busaids, who ruled Oman in the 19th century, stood out in the Indian Ocean world as significant Asian imperialists. Their most notable patriarch, Sultan Syed Said, Sultan Syed Said stretched the frontiers of the Sultanate from the port of Muscat to Zanzibar in East Africa, where he thrived on the profits of, predictably, the slave trade. He had a foothold in Iran with the port of Bandar Abbas on a long lease, and he was linked to the western coast of India via the Kutchi merchants who bankrolled his clove and his date plantations. This spatiality spread over Iran, India, western coast of India, and Africa, east coast of Africa, determined Oman's fate to a large extent. Its ports of Muscat and Zanzibar were hotspots for slave trade, and its desert interiors were the playground of the Wahhabis. The Western powers in the 19th century, obsessed, as we all know, with both the Wahhabis and the slaves, made a beeline to Oman, and that's not surprising. This offered the perfect opportunity to the sultans to entangle in global conversations on slaves and Wahhabis, and in the process, create a political niche for themselves in a world that was still very imperial. These European entanglements made all the Al-Busaidi sultans who succeeded Syed Said in the long 19th century active political agents in the Indian Ocean who stand tall among their contemporaries. And the contemporaries were the Qajars in Iran, Muhammad Ali Pasha in Egypt, and the Ottoman sultans Aziz and Hamid. This is the political world that they occupied. The protagonist of my talk today is the younger son of Syed Said, a man called Sultan Barghash, who had been deputed by his father to be the Sultan of Zanzibar on the Swahili coast of East Africa. So let me now put the micro-optic on Barghash to narrate to you the story of the Indian Ocean as a vibrant political space which offered a range of opportunities to Asian imperialists like him to perfect their alternate politics even as they continued to entangle with Western imperial design. So let's begin the story of Barghash as a micro-optic into the Indian Ocean world of the 19th century. Syed Barghash, the younger son of the Arab patriarch Syed Said, became the Sultan of Zanzibar in 1871 in the high period of what I call counter-revolutionary imperialism. His temporal location meant that he had to face the challenge of European political and economic ascendance and survive in a world that was seeing the emergence of the nation states. These posed, of course, new challenges of survival and the need to refurbish the Sultanate in new ways. The monarchy that he instituted was old in style in that it continued with the Al-Busairi tradition of blurring the private and public spheres of governance. He was the center of the monarchy, the father figure. His Ibadi religion, which allowed only the most learned in the field of Islamic jurisprudence to become the temporal heads, guided him. His printing press disseminated his religious and legal positions, and his family members and Arab elites held key administrative positions. The Indian merchants and bankers his father had cultivated in Kutch in western India continued to bankroll his politics and his clove plantations in Zanzibar. This core social base, Indian merchants, Arab slavers, and his own family, household, this core social base was necessary to counter the influence of the families of Swahili chiefs on the east coast of Africa, who was still influential and at some places feared more than the Sultan, who had allowed them to continue with land grants and rituals of sovereignty. So if in all these ways, with the family, the household, the Indian merchants bankrolling his economy, the Ibadi faith and religion, and guiding his legal and religious ideas, if in all these ways his monarchy was old, in some ways the monarchy was new as well, and was very outward looking. Barghash's vision widened and his monarchy became more and more outward looking as he travelled widely in a very imperially framed Indian Ocean world. And he travelled because he was based in Zanzibar, the slave hub, and that drew him into the center of discussions on slave trade, abolition rhetoric, and treaty ratifications with many British and European officials. Such deliberations, as well as the discussions on laying the telegraph line, the coal depots that were critical to the refueling of the newly introduced steamships in the ocean as they moved from Aden to Bombay, made him a sought-after figure in imperial circles. It took him to as far as Bombay, London, Paris, and many other parts of Europe. Alongside his quest for new technologies and of shipbuilding and printing, and the drive to forge Muslim unity in the face of lurking Western political clouds on the ocean, took him also, along with London, Paris, Europe, to the Ottoman cities of Mecca, Cairo, Alexandria, Palestine, and Damascus. This exposure made him draw from all these multiple contexts to refurbish his monarchy. Indeed, mobility became the key to his fashioning the monarchy as a modern political form, which brought together the household, reformist Islam, and Western concept of the monarch as a familial figure, and which energized him itself with his global visibility as he actively participated in the imperial discussions on slave trade in some of the most significant European metropolitan hubs of the world. And this global visibility was dear to him and rare and very useful in the forging of his politics. Barghash derived concepts from Western monarchies and used them to explain his distinct political predicaments as an Asian imperialist. He borrowed the concept of the father figure, for example, from Queen Victoria, who projected herself, as we know, as the mother figure. But he was the father figure with a difference. The modern Sultan, looking for printing and ship technologies, participating in imperial forums on abolition, and yet firmly healed in his Ibadi religion and the distinct idea of family that significantly included all the residents of his territories, including his slaves. In 1873, during the abolition debate, which really frames quite a lot of discussion on the Indian Ocean, with Sir Bartle Frere, the British High Commissioner in Southern Africa and the key negotiator who visited Barghash in Zanzibar, he used his particularistic ideas of monarchy and underlined the island's distinct political economy and ecology to articulate what the slave, his labor, and his trade meant to him and his Zanzibarian people. He used these arguments to heal his sovereign status locally, even as his voice launched him in the Imperial Club as an active, if not equal investor in both the politics and the profits of the slave trade. Bargash opposed the 1873 slave treaty that banned the export of slaves from the island. The year 1873 marked a conjunctional moment when the British abolition campaign was at its peak and the island's clove plantations run on slave labor totally devastated by a devastating hurricane. This exceptional coincidence made Bargash assert his sovereign status to defend slavery that was critical, he said, to rescue his economy in the backdrop of this devastating hurricane. He put forward a sophisticated argument in British imperial circles based on the exceptional character of Zanzibar's political culture and economy to justify slave labor on the island, even as he pledged his support for the ban on slave export. He underlined the distinctiveness of Zanzibar's slavery in the social dependence and the integration of slaves in society, and in his being a familiar figure to all his people, including slaves. This uniqueness, he said, made him explain slave labor in Zanzibar as non-exploitative and as different from the ideas of slave labor and slave integration in the Western concept. Bargash, the sole Arab voice in the Western rhetoric on abolition, drew a sharp contrast between the Western and the Zanzibar political economy and justified the use of slave labor as, unlike other European entrepreneurs, no individual, he argued, on his island was wealthy enough to set up sugar presses, earn money, and pay wages to labor. He said that he was opposed to the 1873 slave ban treaty because the withdrawal of slave labor would trigger an insurrection in the ranks of his agriculturists whose lands would perish if slaves were withdrawn. The treaty was passed, as we all know, despite his reservations, but his participation in these discussions projected him instantly as a sovereign in his own right on the world stage. He became visible as an important figure in this wide political canvas crowded by Western, white European powers. He worked around the treaty provisions in his self-interest, emboldened with this boost to his status as a global figure participating in global forums on abolition. He maintained a fine balance of continuing with slave labor in his vast clove plantations and turning a blind eye to the slave traffic, even as on paper he pledged support to the British efforts to ban the export of slaves. Additionally, the debates on slave trade and treaty ratifications took him to London, where his discussions with the British officers lent him the much-needed global visibility, even as he healed himself in local religion and practices. In 1875, he was in London, accompanied by the British consul John Kirk, in connection with the discussion and possible ratification of the slave treaty. He had further discussion with Sir Bartle Fryer and was the chief guest at the garden party hosted by Lady Fryer. In the British capital, he also received the Freedom of the City Award at the Guildhall, attended a state banquet at Mansion House, and addressed ethical concerns about the extraction of ivory from elephant tusks. Underlining in all these events and in all these discussions, it's that the demand from European markets was triggering ivory trade. He visited metal factories in Manchester, Birmingham, and Liverpool, and in a conversation with the Canterbury Padres concerned about slave traffic in Zanzibar, he did not fail to remind them that their rulers too had participated and conquered the world using slave labor and the profits of slave trade. Now, while Barghash continued and continuously underlined his global presence via slavery discussions, he healed himself also in the politics of the non-Western imperial world. And we often fail to acknowledge that the 19th century imperial world had a non-Western component as well. And that imperialism was not only about European imperialism. So he traveled to Mecca, to Cairo, to Alexandria, to Palestine, and to Damascus in the Ottoman Empire. In the 19th century, all these were very, very significant and important Ottoman imperial cities, and the Ottoman Empire, whether we can debate whether it was an Asian or a European empire, but nonetheless, it was a major imperial force, giving a run for their money to the British Empire, which we should, I think, factor into our understandings of British imperial and colonial histories in India, which sadly we don't. So he traveled to Mecca, Cairo, Alexandria, Palestine, and Damascus in the Ottoman Empire, and of course to Bombay in the British Empire. He embedded himself in reformist Islam in most of these Ottoman imperial hubs, and was hugely influenced by the intellectual and material culture of these Islamicate hubs of the Ottoman, both the Ottoman and the British Empire. By the way, Bombay too was a very important hub of reformist Islam. In Cairo, the arms factory and the printing press left an indelible impression on his mind. The city library and the Tibbi madrasas offered him the opportunity to interact with scholars and learn the many wonders of science, anatomical charts, and chemistry. Interacting with the Muslim reformists in Cairo and Mecca, he picked up their idea of establishing consensus of rituals, beliefs, and forms of devotion amongst Muslims to forge some kind of a Muslim unity across sects to deal with the very, very urgent and pressing Western political challenge of the 19th century. He continued with his connect with the Hijaz and facilitated his subjects' easy pilgrimage to the region so that they could interact with Muslims from other empires and exchange views and experiences of what it was like to be subjects of different European empires and build some kind of networks and connections to meet the challenges that Western imperialism was posing to the Indian Ocean canvas in the long 19th century. He built guest houses for his subjects in Mecca, and he was always very encouraging to finance their transport and their pilgrimages and general movements towards the Hijaz and towards other Ottoman imperial cities, including Istanbul. Back home in Zanzibar, these influences collected during his travels both in British and in Ottoman imperial cities were evident in his remarkably liberal interpretation of Ibadi Islam when compared to his personal dedication to its exclusivist tenets. He was welcoming of many religious scholars of the Shafi'i sect from Arabia and of the Hadramut Alaviya Sufi order who did not agree with the Ibadis on many issues, including the fact that political leadership of Muslims could be in the hands of the non-Quraysh tribe as well. And that temporal leadership demanded a knowledgeable leader well-versed in Islamic jurisprudence and military knowledge. This was the Ibadi, political kind of undertone, which was obviously not shared by so many other Islamic sects. And yet, after his travels across the world, in this high period of imperialism, discussing abolition and participating in all these interesting debates on Muslim reform and abolition, in Zanzibar, when he came back, he was very welcoming to all these diverse sects, even though they did not agree on some of the major tenets of Ibadi Islam on politics. If the reformist thinking and scientific temper of Cairo, Damascus, and Mecca made him project himself as a just sultan who was tolerant of sectarian plurality, His stint in colonial Bombay attracted him also to the benefits of being viewed as a modernizing sultan. He was exiled to Bombay very early in his career during the succession struggle with his rival brother Syed Majid. It was here in Bombay that he was first exposed to English material and political culture. During his exile to the city, he had seen the opulent wealth of Indian palaces, and many of these he tried to emulate in Zanzibar. His architectural hallmark, the Baytul Ajaib, or the House of Wonders, because of the electric fittings in this palace in the 19th century, reflects British Indian influences, as does his infrastructural projects like roads, waterworks, electric lights, and the railway line that were laid out in consultation with the public works departments functioning in Bombay. By the way, Bombay at this time was going through one of its worst cholera epidemics, and the sanitation experiments that the British were doing in Bombay were also emulated in Zanzibar by Barghash, and a lot of the colonial rhetoric on cholera and using cholera by way of interventions in local societies, that was also noticed by Barghash to be the same in Zanzibar, and therefore this cholera epidemic of the late 19th century, which struck Bombay and Zanzibar together, these conjunctional epidemic kind of phases, was also something that drew Bombay and Zanzibar together via the conduit of Barghash, who was continuously straddling between them and emulating things that you saw in Bombay in Zanzibar. But most importantly, I think he brought from Bombay the printing press and printers to Zanzibar. They worked in his newly set up Sultanate Press in Zanzibar and helped him consolidate his religious constituency, even as he opened the doors to other sects to settle on the island, and projected Zanzibar as the seat of modern monarchy. I found it extremely amazing that the Sultanate Press in Zanzibar was almost entirely made up of Bombay printing presses and printers and people who he had brought with him from Bombay to publish his things. Now, I think if I begin to round up the career of Barghash by way of understanding the 19th century politics of the Indian Ocean world, then these are some of the new insights that we can begin to think about the Indian Ocean world if as a political canvas alongside being a commercial canvas as well. And that is the point of talking about a different kind of Asian political project that that we can use as a window to highlight the fact that the Indian Ocean was not only a commercial economic space or canvas, but it was also a political space and a political canvas. So let me draw out some of, in the concluding part, some of the important insights of the Indian Ocean world as a political space in the 19th century that we can draw from the life and career of Barghash. Barghash's imperial aspirations, I think, offer us a new kind of oceanic narrative in which Arab sultans emerge integral to the functioning of the ocean in the age of empire, which is generally understood as a Western European momentum and has a very interesting, I would say, political direction. In 1964, the African Revolution for Political Independence targets the Arab elites on the African coast with greater ferocity and violence than it does the British, even though the East Coast is a British protectorate by the late 19th, early 20th century. The revolution was energized more by the Afro-Arab tensions rather than being single-mindedly anti-British in tone, which was the case for most other anti-British revolutions in the towards the end of the 19th and early 20th century. And the modern Republic of Tanzania, that was born in 1964 on the east coast of Africa, today has a Muslim majority, but with a very visible abhorrence for all things Arab. And that is quite visible if you visit Zanzibar or Dar es Salaam or any of its important cities even today. And to a large extent, this visibility of Arab abhorrence in Muslim-dominated East Africa is a continuation of a legacy of Asian political projects, Asian imperial projects that were, mushrooming, were being nurtured and were rubbing shoulders with Western imperial projects in the long 19th century. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Professor Alavi, for the masterly and nuanced lecture. Now the floor is open for questions.
I think I'm quite audible. I'm a complete outsider and I might speak nonsense. But certain things crop up to my mind. First of all, if at Zanzibar the Sultan is having nurturing an imperial ambition, maybe of his own political style and content, how the Sultan from Zanzibar looks at Oman? Is it the metropolitan unit of the perceived empire? This is number one. Secondly, how the relationship between the metropolitan state and, in a way, from the metropolitan state, the Sultanate at Zanzibar is a periphery. Yet, is it controlling more resources than the metropolitan state by its huge authority over the slave trade and also what you pointed out as the clove plantation economy? First of all, and then in that sense, both the control over the slave economy and also the plantation particularly are actually almost an imitation of the European imperial processes. So how much is really the difference, as you're trying to say? And is there any, in terms of political symbolism, is the Sultan, whether from Zanzibar or from Oman, are claiming any higher political epithet or title to bolster their claim that they were having an imperial vision? And finally, beyond the claim and perhaps political culture developing, what is sort of the attitude towards the sovereignty over the sea, which is one of the crucial aspects of your lecture? How they look at the sea? Is it an arena seen as a competitive, conflictual one? And if they saw it, how do they exercise it? Because in that case, one has to hear about, if not a full-fledged navy, at least a offensive defensive flotilla, and where they are kept, how they are managed. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Those were extremely important and good questions. So, to answer your last question first, that from the late 19th century, actually from the middle of the 19th century, ship making and ship docking yards and ship makers and the money for making ships was also as much probably a high priority for the sultans as clove plantations and slaves and date plantations. Along with slaves, I'm glad you mentioned the ship thing because I didn't talk about it, but along with slaves, I think ship making and ship docking and ship financing was the other very important arena or fora on which conversations happened on various forums between Al-Saidi family and the British and Europeans in general. And I think while we are on that, I should give you this little interesting piece of information also that Bombay and the Parsi ship makers in Bombay were one of the most important offers that in these conversations on ship building that the sultans of Zanzibar and Oman had with the British. The Parsi ship makers and their dockyards were some of the offerings that the British were willing to extend to the Al-Saidi family. And that, of course, leads me to answering some of your later questions, which are kind of related, which is that the Indian Ocean world, bringing the Al-Saidi family into the Indian Ocean world as competitors to Britain and to France and to Germany, actually does change the way in which we look at the Indian Ocean from the 18th century onwards as an ocean which, as far as its non-European political protagonists was concerned, they were all like unsuspecting victims of this kind of huge engine of European imperialist and capitalist expansion into the ocean, where everyone else was an unsuspecting victim, finally the ocean becoming a British lake by the late 19th century. So the ocean doesn't look so unsuspecting victim-like, to answer some of your later questions, when we introduce people like Bargash into this picture. It does look like an ocean where I wouldn't say a conflict or a contest is going on, but where I will definitely say that a kind of engagement and a kind of interaction is going on for the same spoils. Whether it be slaves or whether it be the profits of slave trade, my hunch is that perhaps that is why the abolition discussions remain a rhetoric, because there is so much of complicity of interests between both British slavers and abolitionists also, and Asian sultans like Bargash and Arab slavers who there's a kind of materiality of the ocean around the profits of the slave trade that they all share. And so that is why the abolition debate remains a rhetorical debate. And it became, and people like Jeremy Presswood, etc., have argued that it remains a rhetorical debate because there is a lot of shared ground between British abolitionists and slavers. But those kind of works on slavery and slave trade in the Indian Ocean are very British and very European imperially framed. What they forget is that it remains a rhetoric because Arab imperialists, or at least Arab protagonists with imperial ambitions and Arab slavers are also sharing this kind of reluctance to actually stop the trade. So the debates on abolition and rhetoric are useful for all other kinds of reasons, all other kinds of political reasons. For Bargash, as we saw, they are very important for his global visibility, and then using that global visibility for his internal politics, and kind of creating a kind of squeezing himself into this white man's club, as it were, in Paris and in London and in Guildhall and all of these places. And there are these, I think you saw those slides of his darbar being attended by Bartle Frere, which in the 19th century is almost unheard of in most of the narratives of a capitalist imperially framed ocean. So the ocean looks definitely not an unsuspecting victim. The abolition and the debates, I think, look rhetorical because of the shared, interests of and shared reluctance of both Arab and European imperialists and slavers to do much because everybody is profiting from this trade. And as far as your first question, I think, was concerned, that the metropolis and margin question, that's a very interesting question because looking at Asian political aspirants in the age of empire, puts a very different kind of spin on what is metropolitan core and what is periphery. So again, this whole idea of global history, world history, what is core, what is metropolis, is very Western framed. It ends up as being a kind of history or a kind of explanation closeted within an empire, a British empire, for instance. So, according to the territorial, cartography of the British Empire, certain things are territorially core and certain things are territorially fringe. But I think if you look at what I would call the political ad hocism of non-Western imperial projects like that of Bargash. I would call it a political ad hocism, of political practice. There, I think, the nation state, its geographical contours and territories, they seem, kind of not the perfect frames to understand what is peripheral and what is core, because the political imaginaries are more important than territorial cartographies, in the case of Asian imperialists like Bargash. So, for instance, a perfect case in point of this would be that for Bargash, the political boundaries of his sultanate were East Africa, Persian Gulf with Bandar Abbas, his own Arab code, and Bombay and Kutch and the western coast of India. Whereas we know that in terms of territorial occupation or control, Western India was never part of the Omani Sultanate, but because of this huge, Kutchi capital, in Gujarati Indian merchant capital, kind of fueling the economy of the Sultan, the western coast of India was very much part of their political imaginary. I would say it was the core of their political imaginary and Sultanate because all the money was coming from there. And it's not for nothing that throughout the Sultanate, from the early 19th century to the period of Bargash, the custom master of the Omani Sultanate was always a Kutchi Bania. And that speaks for it. That answers the question who was core and who was periphery, even though in terms of territorial cartography, Kutch and Bombay and the western coast of India were periphery. But in terms of political and economic imaginaries, they were very much the core. So I think that for Asian political ad hocism and imperial aspirations in that long 19th century, among other things that they subvert and confuse and kind of complicate is also this kind of very empire-framed core periphery issue. I hope that answers some of your concerns.
Is there any question?
Hello ma'am, my name is Alavi. I'm a PhD scholar. First of all, thank you very much. I thoroughly enjoyed your lecture and I learned a lot. So my question to you is that when you were talking that he was traveling to this east and west, and he incorporated a lot of ideas. And you said that he also came across reformist Islam. And he projected a very just image because he was also welcoming different kinds of sects, including the Shafi'i sect. So my question is that did he also see any kind of change in his policy while he was talking about or maybe welcoming the idea of reformist Islam? If yes, then what were those? And secondly, what was the position of the Orthodox in his court when they were experiencing this shift of discussing about reformist Islam and inviting Shafi'i sects and other sects? So that's my question.
Okay, thank you. I think there are a lot of very, reputed scholars of Islam and religion here, and I think they know better. But still, my understanding is that Ibadi Islam, which the Sultans of Oman followed as their religion, kind of brought together spiritual and temporal powers together. They fused temporal and spiritual powers. And Ibadi Islam also laid down guidelines which were pretty temporal, quote unquote, to understand who would be a perfect or ideal king. And one of those important operative guidelines was that it had to be a person who did not have only spiritual, prowess or clout, but also someone who was well groomed in learning and learning of fiqh or jurisprudence, and also learning of military practice and technologies, etc. So, for a long time, such a person in the early 19th century bit of Omani history, they never called their Sultan, they called him Imam. So the Ibadi Imam was a spiritual as well as a temporal head. Now, I think that when Sayyid Saeed became the Sultan, he split this idea of spiritual and temporal head being combined, and he left very cleverly, because Sayyid Saeed, with whom I started the story, was in the 19th century, and he had to face the challenges of Western imperial, expansion on the ocean. So Sayyid Saeed split this spiritual and temporal fusion and left a separate spiritual head in the interiors of Oman, in the desert, in Nizwa, which was the old capital of Oman, and made Muscat his capital, with he as the temporal Ibadi Sultan. So he split the two. Now, I think that this was a clever move, and it was a clever move because it enabled him then to push and pull the contours of Ibadi Islam according to the pressures of imperial politics in the 19th century. And one of them, as I said in my talk, was that there was an urgent desire to be the leader of a united Muslim constituency in the ocean in order to face this very aggressive capitalist and imperialist takeover of the ocean in the 19th century. So, this kind of, as a temporal Ibadi Sultan, he said that, for us, for us, jurisprudence, knowledge, and all these things are extremely important, but for considerations, for political predicament, for considerations of forging Muslim unity, we are welcoming to Muslim reformists who do not, necessarily agree to a temporal head being, learned in all these sciences. This idea of postponing, I would say, sectarian differences on politics in order to meet the political ascendancy of the West in the high imperial period, this idea he definitely was influenced by in Cairo and in Mecca, where, as my earlier work shows, that in the high period of European imperialism, a lot of Muslim reformists were running away from Indonesia and from India, from Sri Lanka and from various colonial cities, and collecting in order to share their ideas and work out a kind of religious and political consensus that would enable a Muslim unity in order to meet the challenges of Europe. So in that sense, that was the influence, so that the Ibadi Sultan had, visiting Cairo, and when he came back to Zanzibar, he followed that principle of accommodation, maybe temporarily, maybe only for the period of high imperialism, and in that, this idea of consensus and this idea of compromise, he picked up from Cairo and Hijaz, and he implemented that in Zanzibar, opening its doors to the Hadrami Alavis and to the other, kind of Shafis and all, with whom they had many disagreements about how Muslim politics should function, right? There's a question here. Last. I'm happy to take more if don't make it last for me because of me. Yes.
No, my students here are most welcome to ask questions. Actually, I am not asking a question. I just want to make an observation.
Yeah.
Actually, as the center of today's lecture is Oman, I just remembered a historical novel on Oman written by Joka El-Harsi, which won the Man Booker International Prize in 2019, named The Celestial Bodies.
I see. I didn't know that.
That actually sheds light on the dissolution of the traditional Omani society and the slave system and the final abolition of slavery in 1970. Actually, slavery continued in Oman for quite a long time.
Yes.
And this novel sheds valuable light on this interesting process and the stress and the strain on the Omani people, about which you once made a remark that if slavery is abolished, then the agricultural system will collapse.
Right.
And one more historical novel is Segu, about which Dr. Mukherjee is also aware. This actually deals with the Western Africans who built an empire called Segu. And there also slave trade flourished, but it was not European slavery. That was Arab African slavery. So that offers a rather interesting and less highlighted part of world history.
Yes, thank you so much. I should definitely have a look at both these novels. Thanks a lot. I wish I had spoken to you all before I wrote my book, and my book would have really benefited from all these questions. That's it.
Thank you to all the questioners. Now I would request Professor Velika Chakraborty, Professor of Philosophy in Boston University. She had a formative role in raising Professor Satadru to express a few words with us. Sure.
Say something about Satadru as a person. We all know about his academic life, the books he had written, and the posts he enjoyed, etc. But he was a very, very favorite nephew of mine, and I was his youngest Masi. And as a boy, he was very, very precocious. Very curious to know about everything, and he was learning new words. He, and he wouldn't say a distorted version of that thing until he masters it. I remember Joshma is rather difficult to pronounce. He kept on asking me he, and he knew that he won't be able to pronounce it. So he desisted from pronouncing it in a distorted way. And he was just 2 years old when this Bangladesh Liberation War took place. And he was so aware of all his patriotic songs, Amar Sonar Bangla, and etc. And he would explain to his audience, all those who were interested in listening to him, what it means. Moni means mom, he used to say. And so that's his childhood, and then they left for USA when he was a teenager. But he was a he continued to love his country lastly. And he was a Bengali to the heart. And he encouraged his daughters to learn Bangla, listen to Bangla serials for kids. And he was a very loving father, very loving elder brother. He performed all those Mukhe Bhat Annaprashan ceremonies for his nephews and nieces. So we will always remember these small anecdotes about his childhood, his youth. And I last saw him in 2017, and I was his first guest in his new house, the last place where he lived. So yes, we still can't accept this tragic loss. He will always be remembered as a very, very bright kid, loving father, and he was very fond of adventure. I remember he went to Ladakh many times, and he survived in Kochu, you know, this Bati Kochu, Alavi is called in Hindi, that kachus, curry and rice, and he traveled in trucks because no standard transportation was available. So my brother was posted in Srinagar, and he arranged for the journeys, but he traveled in lorries, and when he was so fond of adventure, even in USA, he would, yes, you said that he was very fond of motorbikes. He used to travel for miles and miles in bikes, and once his passport was lost, just flew away. Something like that happened. Yes. I don't remember whether he found it or not, or whether he had to make a fresh passport. Anyway, these are the personal things which I still remember, and I thought I would like to share with you. Thank you.
Now I would request Sarna Upadhyay to share the vote of thanks, deliver the vote of thanks.
First of all, I'd like to thank Professor for sharing such precious memories with all of us. And of course, I'd like to thank Professor Alavi for this fascinating lecture. It is with great honor that I express our sincere gratitude on behalf of the History Department for being present with us at this insightful discussion titled Sovereigns of the Sea, Omani Ambition and the Age of Empire. The success of this seminar would not have been possible without the collaborative efforts of many individuals. On behalf of the seminar committee, I express our sincere gratitude to our respected faculty members who organized and coordinated this event. I would also like to express our gratitude to all the participants who actively engaged in the discussions and questions that added depth to the seminar and made it a truly interactive experience. We'd also like to convey our thanks to the Vice Chancellor of Presidency University, the Dean of Students, and of course Shobhata for helping us out with the sound system. It goes without saying that our sincere appreciation goes out to Professor Seema for the intriguing lecture. In closing, I would like to extend our most sincere thanks to everyone who played a role in making this seminar a success. Just carry forward this knowledge and inspiration in this event and continue to be the students of history that we are, and continue to experience such wonderful seminars and increase our knowledge about